Okay, great. Well, as folks are joining us here, we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone, to the CWEA Students and Young Professionals webinar series. My name is John Lieberzahn. I work here in California at Tomorrow Water. I'm a member of the Students and Young Professionals Committee at CWEA. Great group. Sammy Hunkler, who is the chair of the committee, is also on the call with us. You'll hear from her later. Our webinar today is called Finding Your Voice. We got Andrew Walker, Tom Freyberg, and Alan Shapiro, who are all part of Know-How, a team of dedicated marketing communications consultants who specialize just in water and the water industry. Before we begin, I just want to cover some Zoom logistics. So during the webinar, if you have questions, feel free to type those into the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of the Zoom window. The presenters are going to see those and can answer them. If you have any technical issues, you can open the chat box and you can type in your question. We have the wonderful Megan Barillo from CWEA staff who's on the call to help us iron out any technical issues. Also, it's really critical. This is going to be an interactive webinar. So we encourage you to actually go ahead and speak to us. If you want to ask your question out loud or if you want to respond and participate, just go ahead and use the raise hand feature. You can see that yellow arrow. If you click that, there's going to be a little signal that comes up and we'll actually be able to call on you and give you a chance to unmute your mic and speak on the webinar. So take the opportunity to do that. This webinar is also being recorded and will be posted to the CWEA YouTube page shortly, so check that out. I also want to just cover really quickly some upcoming events. So first of all, we have a webinar coming up. This is the CWEA CASA COVID-19 December update, critical to keep up to date on new COVID materials here. And that's going to be on December 15th. Also, the Kurt Brooks Scholarship application period is getting started. This is a great scholarship. And it is for students, but actually not just for students. Anyone out there who's taking water-related coursework is welcome to apply and get some money towards some of that learning in water and the water industry. The applications are due January 15th, and the details for applying to this great scholarship are in the chat. Please share it with your friends, with your colleagues, with your family. Maybe somebody, a young person that works with you, would be great to recommend to get into this. So we really want to make sure that that money is available and that it gets it does a lot of good work helping folks with their studies. Also, save the date on April 20 to 23rd. We're going to have the CWEA annual conference, AC 21. So mark your calendars now. And with that, I want to turn the presentation over to Alan with Know-How. Alan, I think you're still on mute.
I am still on mute. Thank you, Andrew. I think that was part of your talk on presentations, not being on mute, but here I am. So thanks, everyone. It's really great to be able to join you from Vancouver, Canada. We've got a pretty wide range of geography in terms of the speakers today, which is great. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to highlight water best practices from around the world and how much of this shared language shared space, shared language we're all part of. So I'm excited to chat with all of you today about science and stories. But first, I would love to get a sense of your backgrounds that you're bringing in with you today. So there's a poll that should have just popped up on your screen where you'll see an opportunity to choose what your background or future path is. Give me just a minute to fill that out. Perfect. So what I'm seeing here, we've got a lot of folks from utility backgrounds or looking at future roles in utilities, 62%. We've got 15% of folks in tech companies and 23% in engineering consultancies. So a great mix, and I think that's really going to be captured throughout the day as we take a few different perspectives. Myself, as a consultant and coming from a background of working with a lot of technical folks, both from academia and from industry, and then delving a little bit into content development and presentation techniques in social media. So next slide, please, Andrew. And one more. So here's where I want to start off today. This is my frame of reference anytime I dive into a communication exercise. As someone who comes from a background of hydrogeology, I spent some time in undergrad and grad school just working on good old groundwater contamination problems. And to me, I was trained to evaluate communication based on how it felt when I completed the task. So a good report was one that I enjoyed writing. A good presentation was one that felt good when I delivered it and you got off stage and you're like, yeah, that was awesome. But the real frame of reference that I want you guys to step into today is this. How well we communicate is determined not by how well we say things, but by how well we are understood. Next slide, Andrew. So why story? Once we recognize that to move from whatever our technical content is into something that is communication oriented, why story? I mean, to many of you, storytelling might be this thing that you associate with fairy tales and with books that were read to you when you were kids. And the thing that I want to highlight is that we think as humans in terms of stories. We've got a depth of literature that shows us that people understand the world in terms of stories, that our most successful communication of technical material has been through story form, even if at the end of the day, we're just here to throw tables and graphs and numbers out. It's by highlighting the stories behind and around these numbers and graphs and tables that we can really have them resonate with the target audience. Okay, I'm looking a little bit quiet here. Let me see if I can just, is that a little bit better if I hold my mic here? Anyone in the chat?
Perfect. It is better, yeah.
Awesome, thanks, Andrew. So this is a great article from The Guardian a couple of years ago. And this is a quote that I pulled out of it, that facts need interpretation. And interpretation is what gives facts meaning. And it's that process of interpretation that translates our science into story. Next slide, please. So let me just highlight what I mean when I say story. I'm agnostic at the moment as two different media. And so Tom is going to highlight a little bit during his talk what form this content can take. But here's just a range of this. This is something that I worked on earlier this year with a group of students that I was supervising at the BC Institute of Technology, which was actually a very boring project that came up with a database of all sorts of construction technology companies across Vancouver. And the thought was, how do we make this relevant to people? How do we make this resonate to people, especially in the business community, the investment community? Because no one gets excited about a data. Well, I get excited about a database, but most normal people don't get excited about databases. And so this is what we came up with, the $426 million sector you've never heard of. And this is Vancouver's cleantech construction technology ecosystem. This got a lot of coverage. This ran in a bunch of local publications in Vancouver and generated actually interest and funding for the next stage of this work, which was really figuring out how to support this ecosystem in Vancouver and across Canada. Here's another example, just thinking about how do we build connections between folks and their water systems, right? We as water scientists, we as utility professionals tend to look at our water in terms of numbers. Fundamentally, that might be water quality parameters, that might be water supply numbers, that might be water availability and water scarcity. But a form like this, a visually engaging form that gives us a sense of the scale of those numbers, that gives us a sense of geographic connection to that water resource, again, is a much more intuitive story as opposed to just showing it in data form. And then this, to be honest, is my favorite visual that I've ever found of the water cycle from a cartoonist named the Awkward Yeti. When I reached out to him several years ago asking if I could use this in a science talk, he was just so excited that science folks appreciated this interpretation. But to me, we tend to love overcomplicating things, and sometimes story is just simplicity. Sometimes it's what are the core elements that we need to be able to tell the story, in this case, of the water cycle, without adding everything else around it. And if you go and look up the United States Geological Survey's standard water cycle diagram, you'll find arrows and you'll find labels and you'll find long words. But why tell that story when this story will do? Sometimes a story is best told through emotions, and this is something that we might not be comfortable with if we're used to telling impartial stories by throwing numbers, by throwing facts out. Sometimes we need to take a step back and wonder, wait a second, but why is our audience here? What are they listening for? And some of the most powerful stories around water are really about water risk, about water scarcity, and about the emotional impact of what these things really mean in practice. So let's chat a little bit then about how do we translate science into story? And I think this starts with the recognition that the currency of technical information is data, and the currency of communication is content. And Tom is going to highlight for you a little bit more what that content might look like. But I want to highlight now, what steps do we go through as we start to think through how do we translate our data into content? For those of you who spend a lot of time reading scientific papers or deep and existential technical reports, you might notice the format on the left-hand side is one that is familiar to you. I was just looking at a report for a project I'm working on with a municipality around their waste streams, and it was an assessment of their landfill and the content that they'd received over the last 5 years. And it spent most of the time focusing on the methods, how excited they were about the methodology for how to sample garbage effectively. In reality, what is our audience looking for? And in most cases, our audience is looking for results first, significance second, and everything else third. And if that means that we need to get a little bit less excited about the methodology and a little bit more focused on what does this mean for the audience, that is a gear switch that we have to make in our minds as we start to reach outside our peer communities and towards external audiences. So here is my equation for you, which is probably very offensive to anyone who actually spends a lot of time looking at equations. But on the left-hand side, you'll see the information that you come in with. So the information might be numbers, the information might be results form, the information is whatever is the raw material that's acting as your input. So let's chat a little bit about the envelope. What is the envelope you put that information into to turn it into content? 3 questions that I ask myself with every communication exercise. I still ask myself these questions, no matter how large or small, whether I'm putting a tweet out on Twitter and wondering what is the best way for me to take this paragraph of text and digest it down into something that works for a Twitter audience, or if I'm writing a report or giving a talk. The first question I ask is, who is the audience? And this is the single most important question that you can ask for any communication exercise. So who is the audience? What did they eat for breakfast when they woke up in the morning? What do they care about? What does water mean to them? Are they interested? Are they disengaged? Are they hostile? Are they polarized? What is their level of technical background? What do they care about with respect to the issue that you're speaking on? Number 2 is, what is the format? And so fundamentally, even with the same audience that you're trying to reach, different formats work differently. And so Twitter is a great example of a format that gives you 280 characters and perhaps an image, if you want to attach an image, to tell a story. Whereas if you're writing a 20-page technical report, that is a very different format. Number 3, What is your purpose? And this is often one that we forget because we get so caught up in, I am making a PowerPoint presentation and it will be the best PowerPoint of all time, that we forget what the purpose is. If the purpose is to make a sale, then fundamentally that's how you're evaluating the success of the communication. If the purpose is to submit a resume, being your format, and to get a job at the end of it, then you have to be true to that purpose. And your communication has to be tailored to achieving that purpose as well. So I'd like to throw a couple of questions out to all of you. And if you don't mind using the chat to respond, I've got 3 questions. And the first one is, what do you need to know about your audience? So regardless of the communication exercise, whether you're stepping into a room to talk to a group of people, whether you are writing a report to submit to a group of people, whether you are writing an op-ed that you would like an audience to read. What do you need to know about your audience? Give you a minute or so to respond to that. Their level of awareness about the issue. Yes, fantastic. What are they coming in with? Are you trying to educate? Are you trying to market? Are you trying to engage? What are they listening? Why are they listening? What is the problem the audience has that I'm helping solve? For sure. This comes down to fundamentally, there is some problem that they're facing, which might not be the problem that you're coming in with. And if you can resonate in terms of your solution with that problem, then that achieves the impact of the communication. What are their main interests? How much do they know about water to begin with? Their expectations. Who do they trust? What do they trust? What is their relationship with science? If I walk into the room and say, I'm a scientist, what connotations does that carry for them? Their background and understanding. This is all fantastic. And so I think we've covered most of the main bases there. So then my second question for you is, how do you learn about your audience? Coming back to some of those examples of, I might be getting on stage, I might be writing an article. How do I learn about the audience that I am speaking to or writing for? Ask questions. Previous survey, exactly. How much data can I gather before I walk into the room? What questions can I ask when I'm already in the room? Pre-research on LinkedIn, spend as much time social media creeping as possible for sure through their current positions. Yeah. And that means to me, especially if you're standing on stage in front of a group of people, that means taking every opportunity to listen and not just to speak, because the command and control training that we get in terms of coming in and exactly expressing the point that we wanted to express and everyone leaving the room with exactly the right idea of what it was that you wanted to say is not accurate. In reality, it's really this: what signals are the audience sending me? How can I listen to the audience as I'm speaking to them? And how can I incorporate that to learn more about my audience throughout the talk? And my last question for you is, what is the purpose of some of these communications? A report, a presentation, a resume? Just throw one of these out at me. So choose a communication exercise that you might have on your plate. What is the purpose of that communication exercise? Sell my idea. Thanks, John. So maybe it is sales, right? Maybe that's how you're evaluating the effectiveness. Persuade fundraisers. Yes, that is one that I face quite a bit. How do you persuade the right people to give you the right amount of money? Finalize a decision on a project. Fantastic. So you might be communicating information, but your purpose might be to finalize a decision. Conveying the message, making them interested in the ultimate message. Cover letter to a job application. Perfect. So communicating why you are the best person for that role. Document and record past decisions made. So each of these different purposes, each of these different formats, each of these different audiences puts a different spin on the information that you are bringing in. Finally, I just want to throw out a quick note on language. We're not only speaking about different information, but we also speak differently depending on what communities we're a part of and what our purposes are. Scientific language tends to seek precision, and in the process, it tends towards jargon. Here's an example I just pulled out of a paper yesterday. This paper reports the characterization and evaporation performance of a nature-inspired synthetic leaf made of graphene oxide thin film material, blah, 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 blah. So for some of you, this might mean a lot, and in fairness, it is very precise. We know exactly what this paper is talking about, and in the process might have bored half the audience to death. The other side of this is story. It seeks engagement, but in the process of looking for engagement and looking for clicks, it tends towards poetry and sensationalism. So here's just one example. The greatest water crisis in the history of civilization. If you live just about anywhere in the American West, you or your children and grandchildren could soon be facing the age of thirst. This is an article that I found that aired last year. And in fairness, while we can talk about drought and we can talk about water crises, this seems a little bit sensational even by that metric. So that is all that I wanted to throw out there. I'm just going to do a quick time check with Andrew. How much time do we have for questions here?
As much time as the audience needs.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, then, is there anyone who wants to jump in with questions at this point before I hand it off to Tom?
Okay, thank you, Alan. Unless any questions, has one come in?
I see one. How do we cross the cultural barriers? That is a great question. And I think this is one of just fundamentally understanding audiences, right? We tend to project our own experience onto different audiences. We tend to assume that, well, everyone who is in the water space tends to think alike. But in reality, we need to check those assumptions, right? And that sometimes means going and engaging with gatekeepers of different audiences and saying, hey, can I find an organization that engages with these audiences regularly? Maybe it is a cultural organization if you're reaching out to a particular cultural audience to say, what are the values of this group particularly? What are the interests of this group particularly? So you're not just extrapolating from your experience, but so you can actually get that input around what that audience cares about. I see one more question there, unless Andrew, I saw you unmuted if you want to jump in with some more.
Just that we're going to cover that excellent question from Catalina in slightly later when I start talking about presentation. So let's postpone that question till later. Catalina, your answer is on its way.
Well, in that case, now that I've bored all of you half to death talking about science, we're going to have our fantastic expert storyteller, Tom Freyberg, come and chat with us a little bit about content development. And Tom genuinely is a content expert. He has written for publications such as WaterWorld and The Guardian and CNN, and now through his work with Atlantean Media. So Tom, take it away.
Alan, thank you for the wonderful introduction. By the way, love the Aqua Yeti. May have to talk with you about using that at a later date. But firstly, thank you to you guys for hosting us. It is the evening here in the UK, so we're well caffeinated and ready to go. But really great start from Alan in terms of turning science to stories. But I want to just now move the discussion on to in terms of my experience in turning content into stories, as well as working across multiple projects, and just on the creative side as well, sort of coming up with different brands and different types of content for different audiences. So if you can do the honors, Andrew, as the first slide. So content is the engine. I just want to kind of let people think about that for a second. Brownie points if you can name the engine as well.
Me.
No, you're not allowed to take part, Andrew. But I'm going to go on to explain. I think content in the past has been perhaps misunderstood and misused, and now people are really valuing the value of content, especially in the COVID crisis, which has accelerated that. But what I'm hoping to explain to you guys in the next kind of 10 minutes or so is how, if done right, with the right strategy and right quality and quantity, content can be used as the engine of an organization. It can be used to help maintain the company's messaging, maintain engagement with the brand, especially during kind of turbulent times that we've seen this last year alone. So next slide. I'm not going to dwell on this too heavily. I mean, most of you will know the kind of the value of content, but I think it's a quote on the right-hand side from McKinsey & Company saying that really brands providing high quality content experiences are worth up to 20% more. So in terms of putting a value on what content can add to a company, and hopefully we'll go on to explain that later on. So next slide, please. So this is just, for me, when I work with some companies, particularly smaller organizations where they have a single person that does marketing, communications, content, and we'll go on to those roles later on. I think sometimes, what do we actually class as content? So for one organization we work with, we kind of split it into two. On the left-hand side, well, bottom left, you have the campaign marketing content. So this is very much kind of looking inwards. So in terms of company developments, company announcements, lead generation, engagement with current customers. On the right-hand side, the content model is really market and data driven. It promotes thought leadership. A lot of it's based on search engine optimization. We're not going to go into too much detail on this presentation. We work with another consultant on that. It's CEO interviews, and it's really content created with a long shelf life that's designed to be engaging and shareable. So next slide, please. So here's just a really quick example. I can't see the bottom of these slides actually because of the Zoom, but we did a bit of work in the data center space. And here's kind of two examples of the marketing content I was talking about, and then the thought leadership editorial content. So on the right-hand side, how big is Netflix? This was a piece, it doesn't mention the company or the company's services or even the individuals or the employees from that company at all. It's just an area they're involved in when they're a data center company. But this was designed to be engaging content and a conversation starter. And there's a part of a small series of content we did for that company. And the boss, the CEO, was saying, oh, there's a nice tip. Thanks, John, on the Zoom. He had people come to him asking questions, saying, hey, I saw the article that you guys published. So this was really used not as a promo tool, not as a sales, not as advertorial, really as a conversation starter, as a piece of strong independent content. On the left-hand side, separate company, but it's a very traditional kind of PR press release announcement. It's announcing a new product. There's how much the contract was worth, sometimes undisclosed. And really that's just a news update on the company's developments, the products and the people. So you can see both the content. In the old frame of mind, people would think they're the same thing, but they're very different in how they're written, very different in how they're approached, different strategies and different end results as well. So we can go on to the next slide. So this is, I know, Alan, you used the pyramid analogy, so we'll bring it back in, but we're doing some work, and credit to ESCI in a European science communication agency we're doing some work with. This really ties in with the content strategy and direction. So you can see from the very top in terms of social media, higher engagement is the purpose, getting more eyeballs, less of a technical detail, through to the PR, the videos and the infographics. So it's still very engaging content, very tangible, very shareable still, perhaps slightly less eyeballs on it, through to the kind of middle section on articles. That's where we've been doing a lot of work recently in terms of telling that story through a conference presentation or a byline article, right through to the bottom, which is more your peer-reviewed academic journal, your scientific results from that study, depending on what area we're talking about. So from the bottom right until the top, that's how we're looking at content at the moment, and how other organizations are as well. So we always have to bring the Queen in. Like I said, we're a big fan, but this for me is hugely important, and that is everyone talks about the king of content being, the content king, but really what's content if you can't measure it? How do you actually look at engagement? And the Queen is engagement, and as a colleague, Annette Boss in Amsterdam, says to me, she rules the house. So let's go on to the next slide, please. We haven't given a lot of detail here, but just to kind of give some food for thought, there's multiple ways you can measure content. For example, we've only just got a heat map here of a newsletter, so you can see where the click points are. So you can see the areas of light green on the particular. So if you're running a series of small articles or links back to your utility or company page, it's important to know what people are clicking on in that communication. So this is a very tangible image just to kind of give a representation. But we also, alongside that, we have the data points on which articles were the most popular. And as part of the strategy from the start, it's very, very important to set up KPIs to measure the success. So again, that depends on your goal. Are you driving traffic back to your website? Are you looking for the number of articles you're getting published in the nationals or in B2B titles? So set KPIs from the start. If it's web-based, could be traffic, page views, number of followers, report back regularly, and then find out what sticks. And this can change over time, but the only way is to regularly monitor it, have discussions, and then feedback as well.
Mr. Freyberg, we have 2 questions for you, and I'm going to click back, if I can, in theory, to the wonderful pyramid.
Okay.
John Lieberson, I've heard of him. Does the pyramid stage represent volume, the size of it, each stage? So should you focus on lots of stuff on the bottom, less on the top? How do you balance the expected quantity of various outputs?
Yeah, it should be a fair split. It really depends on the project as well. So some of the European collaborations that we're looking at with ESCI are kind of very led by a lot of research. It's kind of scientific-based projects. So that, for them, the core objective is the bottom one, and perhaps social is, I'd say, less a part of it. But I'd say you have to, as part of a broader content strategy, use each part of those. It depends on the outcome and the KPIs we came back to. But I'd say, for me, how you articulate the message on social media at the top part, as well as the infographic, is as important as perhaps the longer peer-reviewed article. But that infographic, in terms of the size of the stack, doesn't necessarily relate to the number or the frequency or the size of the content.
And the second question, I'm going to go to the Queen here because I know that Alan misses her all the way in Vancouver. Martin So asks, how much storytelling is too much in a presentation? Is there a sweet spot on how much you want to spend on storytelling versus data versus other things? And Alan might be able to pitch in on that as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. It has to be a healthy mix. And I think, again, it's knowing your audience. If you know your audience, particularly, say, fond of storytelling, then obviously lead with that result. If you know your perhaps audience is more scientific, academic based, then perhaps lead with more data. But again, for me, and I'll show some examples later on, that really healthy mix. But I think how much is too much storytelling. I think if you're in a conference and they start falling asleep, maybe that's one indication. If you're going through a storytelling means of your content, and like I said, if you're measuring it and your engagement is not so good, that's one way to back it up as well. But Alan, maybe you want to chip in and come back on that one?
Yeah, Alan, if you've not got your face full of a sandwich.
Sure. The one other thing I'll sort of put a question out there is, you might be at an academic conference, you might be speaking to a technical audience, and it's normal to lead with the table, but actually there's research showing that the papers that get cited the most, that the presentations that get the most impact, are the ones that lead with story. So I would question the assumption the table is the best form of communication in any case, and say, what is the story I'm telling? And then, where is a table absolutely necessary? Where can I not use any other tool to communicate my point? Back
Cool.
to you, Tom.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, so this was, I touched a bit upon it and this will come with the scale of an organization, but I do believe that in the future, every organization will have a content director. And this is a role that we kind of help to create with a Dutch partner. And just to kind of, between myself and Andrew and Alan, we were just discussing this before the presentation in terms of the different role and the different backgrounds when it comes to communication and storytelling. And really, at the moment, I would differentiate the three and say that the Marcoms director would be more commercially minded, potentially from an advertising background, very closely aligned with sales, but links hand in hand with the business strategy. Whereas the difference with the content director, journalistic background, more editorial orientated, less sales. But again, the content strategy will align with the overall business and marketing strategy, but it will be very separate. And then Andrew had a good point. Well, hang on a minute. What about a press officer? You know, I think, in fact, in your day, you were a press officer, right? Correct, Sammy. Yeah, great question. So Marcoms is marketing and communication director. So the press officer, this is dealing with crisis and emergency communications, potentially speech writing for the executives of the company, as well as putting those executives in front of the press and arranging the press engagements, as well as handling any calls from the press. So I totally understand smaller organizations will probably have one person that does all three of those roles. It's like, okay, there's someone from the media that's called up, you take care of it. We need to write a press release, you take care of it. You know, but as things expand and the roles separate, I think there's going to be more, as the need for content increases, there's going to be a need for more content directors. And actually, when I look at the jobs that sometimes are posted or linked on LinkedIn, I'm seeing an increase in the number of content director roles that kind of plays into that.
Tom, just want to go back quickly to the storytelling. Skylar's made a really good point saying that, you know, the balance with the details, story versus, it's very dependent on the purpose of your talk, just like Alan was talking about before. So maybe you lead in with the story. What then is your goal? You know, in what direction do you take your presentation? To investigate something, to engage, get more answers, so doing a bit of research, maybe to motivate to some call, you know, kind of action like funding or whatever it might be, or to learn from you, follow up with you for you. So that was a very good comment from Skylar.
Great, thanks, Skylar. Yeah, it depends on the objective, which ties back into the strategy in terms of what do you really want to achieve from that storytelling. Okay, this was you know, not to self-promote, but just to give, I talked about the role of a content director. I know Brave Blue World, from what John was saying, many of you have seen it. Just to kind of look at my background and the justification for why I do think there's the role of content director will increase. And in 2010 to 2018, spent almost a decade as chief editor of a very attractive naming international magazine, Water and Wastewater International, not to be confused with World War I, WWI. Such was the time pre-COVID, was one of the few sort of international print titles, which is no longer around, unfortunately. And then went on to launch Atlantean. And then it was in 2018 where we created the job title of content director, worked on communications within Brave Blue World. And then towards the end, from the last couple of years, worked on event launches, as well as kind of tapping into what Alan was saying, telling science, communicating science and stories. And I'm doing some work with KWR, and their actual motto is bridging science to practice. So there's some examples I haven't included for KWR, but happy to speak about them. So the next slide, if we can. It's just a mantra that we sort of came up with a few years ago, and I think everyone should have a mantra. Andrew, I'm sure you can talk about your ikigai, which is a kind of Japanese phrase for saying where your core focus is. Is it something Andrew does a much better way of articulating. It's something you're good at, something that can pay the bill, something that gives you purpose. And I think the sweet spots for us is creating inspiring content by connecting water and people. So the next slides, I just wanted to go into just some real sort of tangible, practical examples. We were asked by the Trade Association British Water to sort of say, okay, how did you guys treat COVID in terms of coming up with content? So I just gave some examples here of what we did for Aquatech Online. I mean, obviously at the time of March, it would have been very easy to lead perhaps with the screaming, scaremongering headlines. But we thought, how can we sort of, for a water engineering audience who are interested in technology, again, knowing your audience, we thought, how are utility leaders kind of communicating on COVID-19? So we did a short interview with the boss of Colaban Water in Australia, Damien Wells, in the bottom left there. So he gave kind of 3 top tips to other utility bosses, how they should communicate around COVID-19. Coming back to that tech angle, the water technology audience, we looked at examples where water engineering companies are pivoting to either move into helping to produce ventilators or even these containerized ICU units was really interesting. On the top right was quite interesting. The CEO of a tech innovation company put on his social media about actually getting COVID. This was during kind of the early stage. So we reached out to him and just did an interview in his house about how he was, how he kind of overcame it, but also carried on to running the company. And then kind of more opinion, thought leadership from the boss of the British Water Association in terms of the green recovery side. So these are just a handful of kind of headlines, examples of how we got a little bit creative, and we took a topic which was being completely flooded with content, and we found an angle to appeal to kind of water engineers and that Aquatech online database. Next slide, please. So just a slide about podcasting. I'd love to know, not whether you listen to stream or not, but in the audience, who kind of loves podcasts, listen to podcasts, and just to give some ideas in case people wanted to go on and do their own podcasts. We're seeing more being created, kind of how we did it and how we came up with the brand, and really how there's so many tools available to everyone now that if you've got a computer, a laptop, and a microphone, most people can go on and create a podcast. So if we could have a couple of comments, just cool, from John, podcast junkie. Anybody else? That'd be good to hear. Yes, lots of, I love podcasts. Oh yeah, from Sammy, some lots of passion going on. Yes. Okay, cool. So mostly whilst driving. Any other time you listen to podcasts? I heard a guy on LinkedIn that he just runs and listens to podcasts the whole time. Great stuff. So quite an appetite whilst cooking. Good to hear, Catalina. To fall asleep. That's with the stream one, right? That's how that helps you fall asleep. Cooking, driving, working out, gardening. Cool. So lots of interest, and probably all of you have noticed there's just been the podcast complete boom. I think before we started this one in March, I could probably count on one hand the amount of international water podcasts. So I guess the question is, what do we want to do? Who are our audience? How do we want to do things a bit differently? So again, coming back to that, thinking of the strategy, thinking of the who, thinking of the what. So with a partner in the US, Will Sarney, he specialized in water stewardship. And we kind of thought between us, the water, energy, food nexus was this sweet spot that both of us, our peripheries kind of cross over. So we wanted to look at what else is on the market. Another lesson, look at what content exists before you kind of dip your toe in the water, so to speak. And then we just wanted to have a lot of fun doing it. So we kind of came up with this unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation, and just have people on there who are optimists, who are very positive about the future, about innovation. So that's kind of where we wanted to hang our hat. And I think when I look at the other podcasts on the market, there's room for a lot of different people to play. I mean, clearly from the interest here, you can see people listen to different podcasts at different times. I mean, outside of water, I think TED Talks Daily is an amazing podcast to recommend to anyone if you're walking the dog. Variety of subjects. But yeah, happy to speak with anyone if they fancy getting into the podcast game and want a couple of tips. Super easy to do, and it's quite cathartic as well. I find I don't really see the exercises kind of work, but just to speak and have a lot of fun. So next slide, please. There's some good recommendations from John as well. So Water Values podcast, WF podcast, a Blue Tech, Words on Water is a good one from Travis, and a new one called Project Blue. So lots of great podcast listening. So I mentioned the water, energy, food nexus. So you can see the type of guests we had on the right-hand side, featuring from AI to vertical farming, to smart ag water trading, to water stewardship, and the braai, which is South African for barbecue. The reason I wanted to put this on, again, not to self-promote, but just to kind of look at ways to create content or different kind of visuals around the content you're producing. So we kind of went with the whole cyberpunk theme, kind of highway, pulled a couple of comments we had in from LinkedIn engagement, and kind of ran this as like this kind of futuristic billboard. So again, just a creative idea, but pulled together very easily as an idea. Okay, next slide, please. So we're about to go on to the online moderation section. So I'll hand over to Andrew. But maybe another question for the audience is, this year has seen so many webinars. I mean, probably from March until now, I've lost count of the amount of webinars we've been on, not including this one. But there's we had to kind of, again, for Aquatech in Amsterdam, think about kind of what we wanted to do a little bit differently, how we wanted to bring a diverse mix of people in, how do we want to appeal to that water technology international crowd. So we built a strategy around it. We came up with a brand name of Breakouts. And then we kind of had this anti-manel philosophy. So there's been a lot of posts around this at the moment. So we wanted to make sure that even the blockchain one in water you saw at the bottom was an all-female panel. I just basically did the introduction. But we managed to connect speakers from Canada to Australia through to Netherlands in the bottom one. So again, webinar is a form of content. I think we've talked about articles and social media and presentations, but again, webinar, it's only going to become a medium that people use more and more, potentially as they travel less. So again, what we've said in terms of the strategy, the who, the picking the theme, the objectives, what do you want to get out of it, all of that should be applied to the format of a webinar as well. And I'm starting to see some really cool kind of innovations around the tech in terms of the networking and where that's going. So I think it's there needs to be some innovation, but we're at the start of what it's only going to be more and more webinars. So on that note, I'd like to hand over to Andrew Walker, who's going to give us some presentation tips and tips around moderating. So Mr. Walker, if you can come in and say a few words, that'll be fantastic. Andrew, you're on mute. Andrew, if you can unmute yourself, that'll be fantastic.
That always happens, doesn't it? Oh, on my camera views.
You've got quite a lot of headspace, Rudy, as well at the top. So you might want to lower that down. A little bit more.
Of light.
A bit of light would help.
All right. Right. Let's see. Where's this presentation gone? Oh man. It's just, you know. Oh, sorry guys. Sorry, the dog. Oh. Right. Are we ready? You could obviously see that I wasn't, and that is just terrible. I mean, from not having my microphone on, Alan, not having the viewpoint ready for the video, the lighting's really bad. That's just not the way to start with some kind of a presentation, is it? And it's not good to have the animals around. We can't always do things about that, but it's the way it is. And it's also not good to have silly backgrounds necessarily. I mean, you know, I was told that this one was particularly important in North America for giving some kind of presentations, but you could equally, you know, move to the beach or something like that. No, we don't want to do that. We want to be live and authentic, and here we are. So it's my pleasure to be here. Please carry on with the excellent chats which we've got going down here. This is nice acting. Okay, you guys are the best. I'm learning. Show this part of the story. Martin, you caught us out, Martin. You love the intro. We're all awake now. Okay, good. That was the aim of it. Guys, there's no excuse. There's really no excuse for starting off like I just started off. Yeah, it's authentic to have a mistake or two, but there's no real excuse nowadays. We should all be used to this kind of stuff. And the key is to rehearse. So we had a question from Catalina, I think it was before, you know, what's your pre-presentation ritual? And we'll go into that in just a second. What I'd love to know, so I can just gauge how fast to go here, is whether you have moderated before. And the reason I say moderation in terms of being an MC is that is really almost the most difficult part of presenting, if you like. So anything which we talk about when it comes to moderation relates directly as well to presentation techniques and what you should do there. And I can see that through this, the majority of you have not yet moderated things. A couple have, so that's good. I'd love to have your inputs. And maybe it's a little bit different in North America. So please let me know if that's the case. But I wanted to go through some tips and tricks and things that Tom and I do a lot. Alan does. John, you saw, give an excellent entree to our discussion here today. So that's all pretty cool. Right, no questions. Let's get on with it. As a moderator, and this is a little bit different from being a presenter, but as a moderator, you're a facilitator, nothing more and nothing less. And it's an important role, but you could compare it to being the conductor of an orchestra. You're not first fiddle. You're not even second fiddle. If you like, you're the captain to a boat, and also a captain is someone who always puts the team first, right? You're a midwife to a birth. You're not the main protagonist. And that's really important to remember in terms of moderation. So what I wanted to share with you and get your input on as well is how you can either make or break a session of some kind, be it digital or be it a physical one, with good or bad moderation. So let's go into...
So everyone, it is Dr. Mike Yeadon I'm going to be speaking to. It's the 29th of October 2020. Now, Mike is semi-retired, he's 60 years old, and he's currently in France. He has a first-class degree in biochemistry, toxicology, and pharmacology. He also has a PhD in pharmacology. He was at Pfizer for 17 years, left in 2011 as the Chief Scientific Officer and Vice President for Allergy and Respiratory Research. Really good to speak to you. We've been chatting a little bit over the last few weeks. I know you're in France at the moment. It's a difficult time. What I want to say to you first, to make this current, we're going to be talking about the media. We're going to be talking about where you've been able to share your concerns so far, your view is of the media, what your view is of the government, what your view is of somebody called Sir Patrick Vallance, who you used to work with, and also what you think about in terms of the British public and where we're going in terms of democracy and your concerns for the future and where we're at the moment with regard to lockdown, because you're obviously in France, where it's just been announced there's this lockdown situation. So first of all, I just want to ask you, challenge you here. I've just looked at the daily death count. So over the last few days, 151, 102, 367, 310. It is going up, and it does look like it's doubling right at the end of the curve. So is it right that these measures are taking place right now with all these lockdowns and potentially a national lockdown?
It is my opinion. He made it at last. My word, she didn't let him say anything. She spent a minute and a half just on the introductions, and John pinpointed it straight away and said, look, this guy just can't speak. It's incredible. And he kept trying to pitch in. He kept wanting to say his thing, and she just kept interrupting and not letting him. So that when she actually gave him the cue to speak, he was like, oh, can I speak now? And it took a couple of seconds. So this is not how we want to start a presentation, of course. And in fact, my advice is anything you can read online. And I know in a scientific context, particularly, and maybe in a diplomatic context, the titles are really important, but avoid anything which you can read about a person online and get into the topic of whatever it is you're talking about and moderating about. And it's the same if you're presenting as well. You know, don't spend ages saying, oh yeah, I've got 35 years of experience in this and that, and I have a wife and 2 wonderful children and dogs, as you can hear, and Who's interested? You're just wasting people's time. Anyway, I have just a couple of tips, and as I said, please join in right now. What were the first questions Yvonne asks? The first questions were, I can't remember. It's just, I was fascinated. It was about whether
it was about how to best prepare. How do you prepare ahead of an online event, I think.
Okay, must have been. It was about whether the whole thing is a conspiracy, I think, when it comes to COVID. Anyway, this gentleman is someone that those of you who have been in the Scouts will know well. And the motto there is, be prepared. That means you're always in a state of readiness, both in your mind and your body, to do your duty. So Lord Baden-Powell said that, and that is the motto of the Scouts, if you know it. And that's a good thing to try and remember. At least that's what I use quite a lot. And that means that you've got to think about things well in advance in the days before doing a presentation, or in this case, a moderation, these are the kind of things that you want to be thinking about already. You need to know your topic. If you're a moderator who only really tells the time and passes on to the next speaker, you're not really adding a lot of value. But if you know the topic and you're able to speak at a certain level with the protagonists on your panel, then that's fabulous. Know the story. So what's going to go on in that session? And it doesn't matter if it's a full day. It doesn't matter if it's an hour. Know that storyline and what is supposed to be happening, what the objective, as we've been discussing before, what the objective of this form of intervention is. Know your protagonists. We talked about that. So do some social media stalking, I think Alan called it, and check them all out. It's quite easy to do nowadays. You can even see them in action in a video or something online. It's quite good to do. You can tell maybe what their language capability is. If it's not an English native speaker and the presentation is in English, for example, that kind of thing is really important to know. And then understand your own role. Basically, as a moderator, you are representing the audience. You're the person on the stage in front of the camera representing the audience. And that is something you need to get in your mind in terms of that, taking that role on. Yeah, studying the content is just like exams, if you like. So study it, study it, study it, save it, and then try not to do that at the very last minute, but have it saved somewhere in your mind. When you've got that, and as you can see here, there's an image of a wagon in front of the horse. That's not what we want. We want the wagon behind the horse. But when you have got that and you can put the wagon behind the horse, then you start to design the flow. So if you're asked as a moderator to help with a session in terms of designing the interactions, maybe how things are working on stage, if it's a live event, etc., only then do you start to design that flow and set an agenda. And you'll find that if people are asking you to moderate, they'll usually come with a preconceived idea of what the agenda should look like, right? 8:30 until 8:45 introductions, first words, 8:45 till 9:15 this, then we have a keynote speech, and then we go into a coffee break. That comes last. First, define your objectives, know what you want to achieve, know what your content is, your protagonist, and then design the whole flow and the agenda around it. The stage is your environment as a moderator, and you've got to set that stage so that it is best suited to achieve your objectives. Don't accept a stage which has a certain layout just because that's the way it's always been done. Design that stage together with the organizer of the event. I like to draft the script out, and I like to not do that in a detailed way, but do it just as bullet points, basically. And then I write speaker cards, and I use speaker cards. Why do I use speaker cards? It's not because I necessarily need them, and I don't sort of read from them or anything like that, but that is my safety net. So if I do forget someone's name, if I forget what's coming up next, it's all written down there, and I know that I can refer to it if I need to. The other advantage of a speaker card is, I should have brought an example, but you can have the logo of the event on one side of the speaker card, and it's just a part of the corporate branding for that event. But use them as a safety net. Now, the night before, particularly, you need to regulate your cuisine, and this is whether you are a presenter or a moderator. Anything which is going to regurgitate slightly or give you some kind of congestion or things like that is to be avoided, because in the night, it will attack your vocal cords. So anything spicy, alcohol, at least excessive alcohol, strong mints, things with sort of, oils in them, strong oils, chili oils and things like that, avoid it because it comes back up and it attacks your vocal cords. And I've been doing a lot of speaking today, and I've got a bit of a cold, and you can hear my voice is a little bit scratchy. It's not as confident as it usually should be. So think about your cuisine. There are all kinds of things to think about in the days before. So Catalina, I hope this is helping out with some of your questions. Now, on the day itself, you've got to get into a mindful state. You've got to remember where you are, what your role is. You've got to think about things and do some voice and breathing training. Now, I'm not going to go into details about that now because we don't have the time, but if you follow what an opera singer does, for example, before going on stage, and there are loads of examples on YouTube that will help you out. The vocal cords are a muscle. The way you use them depends very much on how you breathe. You're breathing from deep down, and you're not using the upper airwaves because that puts strain on your vocal cords. That's the quintessence. I mentioned before that you are basically a representative of the audience, and you are not the main star of the show. You are not a diva. So decide on how you're going to dress accordingly. And in certain occasions, you may want to dress up. If you're an MC for a gala dinner, you might be in a tuxedo. If you're on stage, typically with other even leaders, you need to really think, are you going to wear that tie or not? Often we don't, even in Europe. If you wear a tie, you know, if it's a blaring, you know, a red one, an aggressive one, something really strong, and it's a real statement, I'm talking just as a man now, then you're going to be trumping, if you like, your other protagonists. And that's something to think about quite carefully. When you are being mindful and going through the script, going through your speaker cards, fine tune them. If there's something you can't quite remember, or there's a little hook somewhere that you get stuck on, you know, rub it out, cross it out, write a new speaker card, and just polish it out. And then rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. I think that's pretty obvious. The hour before, and the reason that I've showed this picture is that it looks like I'm falling asleep, but I'm actually just trying to get into the right set of, in my mind, the right set of thinking, and trying to visualize the whole of the session and the protagonist and what I'm going to say. And that's the photo that you can see there. You're doing a check. You've already rehearsed with the technicians, but you do one more sound check. You make sure the stage is set how you want it to be. You check the cameras. You check that the streaming technology is working an hour before. And even if the AV guys say, no, it's okay, we tested it this morning, check it again. Even as a moderator, it's your job to make sure that the show runs smoothly. And the number of times you'll find that then they have realized they've not rehearsed it properly, they're not in the mindset, is actually quite frequent. So get ready for that. And it also puts you at rest. You have peace of mind yourself about the technology working for you. You don't want to be worried about that when you've got a fairly difficult presentation or moderation to give. Okay, check one last time. Maybe you're wearing makeup. Quite often in the studio, there's a lot of bright lights. You need a bit of powder. Check your wardrobe is okay. Everything's buttoned up as it should be, etc. And your grooming is okay. And one more time, do some more breathing exercises, warm up your voice, and just get into that zone, just like I was saying. A major indicator for me that I am not ready to do a moderation or presentation is if I am not nervous. I need to be nervous. And I've done a lot, but I still enjoy being nervous just beforehand. And it just gets the adrenaline going. It just makes you that little bit sharper. And I know that if I'm not nervous, that something's wrong. I need to give myself a kick up the backside. And the first line is decisive. So when you're jumping into your moderation, if you can get that first line right, then everything else just flows from there. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill. So get that right, rehearse it, rehearse it, rehearse it with the crew as well. And if that's perfect, everything else will be smooth. During the presentation, yeah, we've got a very Queen theme going on here. And the reason that I brought this up is if you've ever watched the Queen's speech, and Tom and I have to, and Alan should do, because she's our boss, right? We have to watch it. Anyway, she goes straight in to her presentation. So in this particular case, she just went in and says, I'm speaking to you at what I know is an increasingly challenging time. So she's already setting the tone for the presentation. She doesn't go into any background or any rubbish, get straight into it. So I think of the Queen and her Christmas speech just to get straight in there and make a really good first impression. That is down to the first line being right to start with as well. Now, I've been going quite quickly now. As I said, my voice is a little bit scratchy. I hope it's clear enough. I probably should have been a bit more articulate. I probably should have spoken a little clearer and not rush. And certainly don't shout. We have microphones that do that work for us. And if you're shouting and screaming like that, firstly, your voice is going to be over-exercised. and will tire. And secondly, your audience is going to get pretty tired of a screaming voice all the time. Use the power of the pause. So if you've got an important point coming up that you just want to underline and underscore, make sure you pause just before it, and then your message will come across a lot stronger. It just gets people's attention on what you're about to say. So the power of the pause is really important. If you do make a mistake, doesn't matter. You know, don't flop around, mess about, apologize, whatever. That's why you're not an AI robot giving the news. You are a person, and it's authentic to make a mistake as a moderator, even if you're trying to be as professional as you can. You are also the timekeeper, and I'm watching the time here because we're coming up to just past the hour. Have a few more minutes left, I hope, if you've got time for us. Don't look at your watch, right? But you're also the timekeeper. When you're intervening, you sometimes get speakers that don't stop. You need to find a way, a segue to intervene into what they are saying. Listen very carefully, find that moment, and if they're just not giving you a chance, you just got to dive in there confidently, not being rude, of course. But that's a really important skill to practice as a moderator. Again, dealing with Q&As, again, confidently. And then you really need to think about a good summary and a good outro. So what's going to happen next? What have you learned in the session? What has gone on? Some personal impressions, whatever that might be. Okay, have fun. They will notice, definitely. And I think we're having fun here. Okay, so Catalina, that was your question answered. Any more questions on moderation? Because I'm going to finish there, and we have a little bit of time, I understand, to talk about social media. All good? Cool. All right, well, with your indulgence, I would like to give you two pieces of bad news. The first bad news is that Damien, who was supposed to be joining us, cannot make it. And it's a shame because he's written a book all about the social CEO, which means a CEO who uses social media for leadership projection. And I wanted to give a quick plug for that. This is a really cool book to look into. The reason is that he has some personal commitments early tomorrow morning, and they're kind of taking his mind space at the moment. So we've excused him from that. The second piece of bad news is that I'm going to present one or two charts that he's given me, which I do know a little bit about, to just try and table the topic of using social media for leadership. It'll take 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes and a few questions in between. So if that's okay with you guys, we'll get straight into part 3, how social media can make you a stronger leader. I already mentioned the book here. The basic quintessence of what the book is trying to say is that it's time for leaders, and you guys will know this already, but particularly older generation leaders, to come out from their corner offices, protected by a personal assistant, barriered to anybody getting in, to come out and come to the water cooler or the coffee machine and speak to people. So the analogy is, with social media, that is exactly what you're doing in a digital way, not in an office, but you're coming out basically to the water cooler and you're actually engaging and interacting with all kinds of people. You are there not only to talk all the time, but also to listen. It's an incredibly enriching experience to learn exactly what is being said on the grapevine. You're there as well to engage. People don't need preaching to. And you are there to help, maybe shape the conversation, certainly to join in that conversation, to earn people's trust, to earn people's interest. Oh, it's not just the boss. You know, this is someone who's actually quite interesting. I didn't know that about them. And here, first and foremost, to be authentic above all other things. I would like to just ask you another poll, if I may. Given this kind of attitude, which I hope I've described so you can get it, do you think that the leaders of organizations that you're present in are already kind of social CEOs? Are they out there? Are they doing things? on social media in a very proactive way, more than just sort of retweeting things? Okay, good. There's a fair few of you which think that your leaders are out there. I'm just going to stop that right now and share you the results. So about 3/4 say not really, but a quarter do. And that is actually a relatively high score compared to other surveys I've done. Maybe it's to do with your organizations being based in North America, where I think social media is a little bit more prevalent than in some other areas at least. So thanks for that. What I'd like to do then is to just talk about a couple of tips and things to do. What are the main reasons for a leader to use social media? It's about building trust, as I said, both in themselves as leaders, as well as their brand or their organization. And particularly if you're from a utility background, an engineering, a technology background, that trust, especially in the water sector, is so essential. And you can make it or break it with how you behave on social media, of course. To promote things, quite clear, but more about promoting people's purposes or their organization's purposes. You might want to stand out from the competitors. You know, if 3/4 of your leaders are not out there, maybe their competitors are already. And those people are standing out for sure. To build relationships with all kinds of stakeholders that are important to you. To build better employee engagement in what you're doing. So if you're talking about your purpose, about your activities, all these nice things which are going on, hopefully your employees can latch onto that a lot easier. To give praise, kudos for your staff and for your partners, and achievements which are made, talent, you know, to attract good talent. I'm sure that many of you, if you're not already, you know, in your long-term employment situation, I'm sure that those that are looking at leaders and organizations which are present somehow in social media. And I imagine that many do not really follow people who hide. To manage crises, for sure, crisis management via social media is really, really important. That's a session on its own. And maybe to bridge the gap to, you know, like we're talking about today, younger professionals and leaders who perhaps are a bit more familiar with social media than non-digital natives. However, do not try to sell with social media. That is out. Do not try and get around journalists. You know, you can use social media to attract journalists to your stories, but don't try and avoid them. Journalists have a good, important role to give third-party unbiased opinion, and don't jump on the bandwagon. Just because other people are doing it doesn't mean you have to. And I really like this quote from one of the authors of Social CEO, Chris Bartley, who says, it's a megaphone. It's not a megaphone. It's a hearing aid. So don't think about projecting your message. Think about listening rather than doing that. Tom has a question. Which social media accounts or profiles do you enjoy following? For me, Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District on Twitter are amazing. I agree with you entirely. We'll come to a couple of new accounts there. If anyone has a list of their favorite accounts, it would be good to share amongst the whole group, probably. I have some at the end of the presentation to share with you. So, tips for algorithms, tips for algorithm loved on LinkedIn. How do you tweet your posts to get that first boost to visibility on connections feed? Oh, good question. Tom, you think about it, and I'll come to you in just a second on that. But this covers this section really. How do you make them attractive to get the most attention? Do you think it's about self-promotion? Do you think it's about company promotion or innovation? Product updates, thought leadership, or event participations? That's the question. And we have an excellent account, which I can highly recommend to you, already posted in the chat. That is twitter.com, CWEA. I'm sure you've all heard of them. So the kind of posts, Tom, if I can come to you, that perhaps do not attract a lot of attention might be self-promotional or even company promotional ones. Is that right?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, I think it's a great question, John. So tips for algorithm love. A couple of things. Within the first couple of sentences, you need to get literally kind of grab the attention, because then people will click and then it increases the engagement. Make sure you're tagging people. I often see people kind of talking about partners in a project and they're not even using the app and then hyperlinking the name. So make sure you're tagging people and their organization. I would say don't use more than 3 hashtags. And also before you use the hashtags, just have a little search on LinkedIn to see how many followers they've got. I did this recently for a company. The difference between resource and resources was thousands. So make sure you choose the right one. Other tips: within the first 60 minutes, try and like and get back to people, retagging their names. Those are the kind of basic rules that I've done to on LinkedIn, but I follow a lot of like creative video guys, and the reports I'm seeing over the last couple of weeks is that LinkedIn has moved the goalposts again and the algorithms changed. So it's almost a bit like kind of SEO and Google. You are kind of trying to keep up with the changing goalposts, but I mean, those things I mentioned can really help boost engagement. But tagging, responding within the first 60 minutes, and don't just post and leave it. Make sure you're engaging afterwards. That can really help boost it within that first phase.
And the kind of image which you choose as well is really important. Firstly, whether you do choose an image at all, of course. Obviously, moving images can be more attractive. And then children and dogs always work well, right? Okay.
Yes.
How do you get started? These are the final couple of charts, guys. So how do you get started? There's just some tips. And well, firstly, write down your goals. The same as Alan was talking about before. What objective do you have for using social media? Secondly, define your community. Are you talking about having peers in your community? Do you want competitors in your community? Maybe not. Clients, opinion leaders. Write down who you think your community should be. Start listening. As we said just before with Chris, it's a great tool to just try and experience things and think about the hashtags, look at the different ones and listen in, try and get familiar with the conversation. You know, at a party, you don't often just jump into someone's conversation. You just stand there and listen for a second. And if they're thinking, you know, talking about something that you can contribute to, then maybe then you will start talking. But firstly, you'll certainly listen. You can test the waters. It's quite easy to set up a private account. I'm sure you guys know a lot more than I do about this, but test it and post just pretty safe material in a very closed community to start with, to help you find your voice and gain confidence. Get into a routine and write down your routine. So leaders in the book, The Social CEO, they have a content calendar and they have a routine of doing certain things during the day. And some of them only spend 15 minutes a day or maybe half an hour on social media. It's not about spending 3-4 hours of your valuable time doing this, but doing it regularly and doing it with a purpose. And you need to have a way of dealing with trolls and dealing with critique, negative comments. Write that down. Skylar writes, I greatly appreciate time saving. The viable information, not empty responses or liking. It just wastes my time. So really moving with social media from playing around and having fun to actually using it as a valuable tool. As a good comment, Skylar. Once you've got started and you're off the ground as a social CEO, and we're getting there, you need to find your own foot and find your voice. And doing so really takes a lot of authenticity. If you're playing a role, if you're acting, you'll get caught out pretty soon. So be authentic, be interesting, talk about your passions, talk about what you care about, the things that really matter to your followers, hopefully that you are able to contribute towards. And avoid, despite my background before being a bit provocative, avoid politics, at least in a business context. Unless someone really says something which has a direct impact on your industry, the recommendation is to not take a political stance, but you can comment on it then. So if it's about you know, the availability of fresh water in San Diego, and new policies or new political stances on how to ensure that during a drought or whatever. Okay, fine. But be careful with politics in general, especially if you are in a public organization like a utility. Be considerate, so be sensitive to age, gender. Tom mentioned the avoidance of manuals before that he mentioned. We've not achieved that this evening. John, Alan, Tom, and Andrew, apologies for that. And be sensitive to race equality in your topics and to you know, the people you have involved with that. Give praise, we talked about that already, so kudos. Support your team. A support team. There is no excuse for having a ghostwriter for your social media posts, none at all. That has to be your voice. But you can have people in the background who help you with data analytics, who help you to suggest topics, who monitor other conversations, maybe in an automated fashion, or maybe just because they say, hey, did you see that? This guy was talking about this and this and this. This lady pitched in and did that and that and that. That is your support team. And it's really great to have that kind of backing. But anything you say it with your own voice. Try and gauge the feedback. We talked about that already with data analytics, for example, but try and find out how you're doing with certain posts, what works well, what doesn't work so well, and get ready, if you like, to open up the floodgates and go public. So to add a lot more people to your community, to start following people, use new hashtags, additional hashtags, and build your community from perhaps a small, trusted community to being open to the storms of the world. And very important, I think, is to recognize that people like Skylar mentioned just before don't want to have their time wasted. It doesn't matter if you're out there on Twitter once a day, once an hour, once a week. It makes no difference. No one's going to win a race in terms of the number of tweets you can put out there. But the quality, that is what people will remember. And I'm sure that many of you have turned off people who are just posting all kinds of nonsense out there for the sake of posting it. When they do have something good to say, you're not listening anymore. And that's a real shame. Finally, you are then a social leader, if you want to call it that. If you notice that a lot more people are following you, they're engaging with your topics, you've got to engage back. Tom said it already. Don't become aloof. People hate that. Quality over quantity, says Yvonne. Absolutely. Did I write it wrong? You got me wrong now. Quality is greater than quantity. Exactly. Yeah. Good. Sorry, just checking. It wouldn't be the first time that I got something wrong. Organizations that are related to your purpose, to what you're doing, they are quoting you. Maybe it's an association, and maybe opportunities as well arise from that. Speaking opportunities, for example. Be selective and be open to them, and delegate them as well to people in your organization. So if you get a lead, an inquiry, oh, I was really interested in learning about this and this and this, you may have an expert in your team who can answer it better than you. Pass it on to them. And recognize and acknowledge the person who sent it. Say, look, it's great that you told me that. Actually, our expert for that, Ms. Smith, is going to get back to you. Mix up the media. We talked about that just a second ago. Include video, for example. And if you are looking about personal messages and opening up your personal life, yes, to a certain extent, but you certainly, if you're going to do it with video, etc., have to regard that social media needs it to be short and snappy. If you have things that you can point people towards that are in the public domain in terms of further information, a website, a paper about something, webinars that you have taken in part of or going to, online articles, then of course, use the opportunity to help people find out a little more. So we did mention before that we're interested in knowing who you follow, and we have, of course, CWEA, and we have Northeastern Ohio Regional Sewer District on Twitter. If you follow either me or Tom, you'll see a lot of tweets from those guys as well. These are just some people that I find pretty interesting out there in the social media space. And I understand you're going to get this presentation. So you can just click on it. It's hyperlinked and follow them. And if you want to follow Tom, this is him. Alan, that is me. And sorry, that is Alan and this is me. Exactly. So we've got a couple of people for you to follow. So who else do we have? Maven's Notebook for California Water, says Skylar. We'll check that out. I'm going to make a note of that. Cool. Guys, that's all I've got for you today. Very happy if you still have patience with us to answer any questions which you may have. I think we've killed them all, John. Sammy?
Yeah, no more questions. Thanks so much, Alan, Tom, and Andrew. That was a really informative and I have to say really fun webinar on ways we can share our stories, engage our audiences, and you gave us a lot to think about, I think, especially in regards to always going back to the objectives of moderating and presenting and utilizing social media. So thank you so much for that.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for having us here at this lunchtime hour. And, you know, obviously we can follow up on this. You'll find us on LinkedIn and all the usual places. So let me hand back control to you and take it from there.
Great. Yeah. And as John just put in the comments, join the SYP committee. We do fun stuff. It's true. Thank you so much for watching the Students and Young Professionals webinar. Stay tuned to the CWEA website. That's where we post any upcoming webinars, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.